Are you the kind of person that's going to give up the second things get difficult?
72% of entrepreneurs experience mental health issues.
We're delighted to share Maciek's inspiring entrepreneurial journey
Entrepreneurship is failing enough times
and a passion for creating positive impact on the world.
In a world where innovation is constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
It's when shit hits the fan. That's when your true colors show. That there's a very good chance you're fulfilling somebody else's expectations of your life.
Thank you for joining us on the Growing Life podcast.
It would mean the world to us if you could just follow us on Spotify, Instagram, and YouTube.
Stay tuned for more exciting episodes coming out every Friday.
With the stories of the past,
Shape your future with the Growing Life podcast.
Mac, as an entrepreneur, I feel like it's become such of a mindset these days. And I feel like I adhere to that mindset as well. And I always remember those first moments where I think every entrepreneur has that moment where they associate with it. And I can vividly remember when I had a Lego piece set up when I was about 6 or 7 years old. And I just remember it all falling apart and breaking down. And for whatever reason, I was sad in the beginning, but then I felt this excitement of having to create something new out of scratch. I was wondering, is there any key moments in your life that means you realize, entrepreneurship, maybe that's the path for me?
Great question. For me, I think it was a little bit less of an aha moment than perhaps Lego blocks collapsing and being able to find some wisdom in that. I think for me, unlike most people, I actually stumbled into entrepreneurship through a process of elimination. I, like yourselves, where I was a student at Sauder, and I think there is a pretty strong pressure to follow certain career paths in Sauder, and I very much subscribed to that during my time there. And I actually ended up in a pretty traditional corporate job working in product marketing. And within a week of being in those corporate offices, I just felt totally depressed at the prospect of spending the next 40 years of my life in those offices, showing up to the same cubicle every single day. It just felt so daunting, and I felt trapped. And it's really then that I started to think about, well, what could the rest of my life look like? Is there another path here? Is there another avenue for me to explore? And throughout university in particular, I felt drawn towards problem solving. In 99% of the cases, it was extremely unprofitable problem solving. So, we started an organization called Dive, and it was really just a hub for all cultural events at UBC, sort of a repository or a calendar, if you will, of anything that was happening that would give students easier access to culture on campus, because we felt that was perhaps not being addressed or served very well. And then a few months later, we ended up starting a business that was helping small businesses figure out their very basic daily profitability, which sounds really simple today, but back then, 7 years ago or so, it was all done on Excel, and it was just extremely tedious. So all to say, I had kind of moments of pull, if you will, towards certain entrepreneurial topics, but it wasn't until I felt cornered in my corporate job that I felt like, okay, I need to do something about this.
I think something interesting as well is a lot of people stumble into careers, maybe sometimes a process of elimination, and they go in, let's say, into marketing, and then they realize they like it. But I feel like with entrepreneurs, it's almost this, you have to try and fail a lot of times, which I don't think is necessarily the same stumbling upon as opposed to other businesses or other career paths. So I know you've had a couple of failures before, like you finally were able to make Apollo successful. Could you please explain that thought process and the failure and keeping at it and knowing this is for you, even though
it's entrepreneurship is failing enough times and not giving up, and eventually you'll get lucky. It's almost like you just have to keep failing, and eventually the 7th time you fail, you'll realize, if I had done it the month before, maybe the pandemic would have made this business a complete success, And if you just keep staying persistent enough, and if you're relentless enough about that pursuit, which is the hard part, by the way, staying motivated despite constantly failing, eventually you'll catch your luck. And then it's just a question of making the most out of that luck. So long story short, we, like I just mentioned, that we started two businesses that were totally unprofitable and passion projects more than businesses. We ended up starting another business with one of my friends, which was really quite interesting, actually. And to this day, I think the concept is quite unique. And the concept was really, can we do the reverse of Uber Eats? So rather than outsourcing cooking to restaurants and bringing the food to you, can we get home cooks to prepare food in their homes and really focus on kind of home cooked food, like the high quality stuff that your grandma makes, and get that delivered to your place. So I'm sure it's been done by now. That was like a good 6 years ago that we were thinking about doing this. And again, it went nowhere, and then we tried to start a business that was more about writing customized and personalized cards and like greeting cards and Christmas cards and birthday cards and everything like that. And that also went nowhere. So I have a very large, I would say, collection of failed companies and startup experiences. And then eventually Apollo was just a matter of good timing. Like I mentioned, we stumbled into something that was booming at that time. We happened to be in the right place at the right time. And then we eventually caught a couple of lucky breaks. And fast forward 4 years, here we are.
Okay, so from what I understand, you started some projects at school. And of being a student, I've been trying to get involved with extracurriculars and stuff like that. However, I find that the more involved I am with something outside of my classes, the more my grades fall, the more I'm struggling with my classes and things like that. And it's always like pick and choose of what I would like to pursue. So how did you balance all that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And don't tell your parents I said this, but your grades don't matter. The truth is, nobody's ever asked me about my grades. Everybody wants to hear about my failed businesses. Every job interview I've been through, they want to know, are you the kind of person that's going to give up the second things get difficult? And by the way, it's easy to be a great leader when you're growing 100% year over year. It's easy to be the, sought after individual when things are colorful and everything's looking up. It's when shit hits the fan. That's when your true colors show. It's when, like today, in a tough recession, a tough economy, businesses are struggling. We are seeing some, moments of slowdown too. And I think it's moments like today that really test your values, test your beliefs, and the kind of individual you always were comes to light. So all to say, how do you prioritize your grades with your extracurriculars? I would say focus on gravitating towards something that feels all-consuming for you. Maybe it's this podcast for you guys. Maybe it's another project you're working on. If it feels like you're sort of losing track of time and you're in the shower and you get an idea because you're thinking about that something while you're doing something completely different, that tells me that something is pulling you in. You're feeling drawn to that activity, and keep going, pursue that. Don't completely fail all your courses. I would say try to do the bare minimum to get through with average grades, but really channel all your energy that remains into that something, that black hole that just feels so all consuming. I remember in the early days of Apollo, we were working out of Chris's apartment, and it was just so exciting for me to get to work every single day. I would keep showing up at 7 a.m. and his girlfriend and Chris were just like still having coffee, in their bathrobes, and I would be just sitting on the desk next to them and be like, hey, I'm just answering some emails. So, totally uncomfortable and bizarre situations. But that need to just get to work, that excitement was so strong, I couldn't help myself. So try and find that, yeah.
And something to build off that, like many people have ideas, including myself. During the pandemic, I spent like countless hours watching YouTube videos on like side hustles and stuff like that. I ended down the drop shipping loophole and like just learning a whole ton of things. But I never really acted on it. And I've always found myself like struggling to take action on my ideas. This is like one of the few chances where I took action. How risk averse were you? Like, how much security did you need before?
Yeah, that's I think one of the most common blockers for people who are on the verge of starting a business, right? It's kind of like it's all in your head, but how do you get it out and actually do something about it? What we did is we tried to hedge the risk of starting a business as much as possible. And what do I mean by that? We started the business because I wanted to get a scooter and we couldn't find it anywhere in Canada. So I went up to Chris and I was like, hey, Chris, would you be down to get a couple with me from Alibaba? We sell them and, we keep the 2 that we want to keep for ourselves, and maybe the 8 will pay for the ones that we want to keep. Simple, right? Now, what we did, because still 10 scooters, times, let's say $500, it was a lot of money for us back then. And we didn't want to just dump $5K into something that maybe will go nowhere. So we ended up posting ads on Facebook. We ended up posting ads on Craigslist, just saying, hey, electric scooters, super simple. We're selling them. If you're interested, let us know. And then we went to sleep. And then the next morning we wake up with something like 60 messages on those platforms. And everyone's just like, hey, I'll come pick it up today. I'll pay you double. No, just save one for me. It was insane. If you've ever sold anything on Facebook, it's just such an underwhelming experience. You get one message and then you don't hear back from that person ever again. And you're like, oh, I just wanted to sell you my phone, right? So it was such a different experience. And that really gave us a bit of confidence that there is something here. So needless to say, by the time the 10 scooters came, we had already a list of 20 customers that we knew we could flip those scooters to, right? So it was pretty easy for us to hedge against the potential collapse of our business back then. Now, I would say that's a relatively straightforward case because you're dealing with hardware, you're importing goods, you can probably try to get some customers ahead of time. But what if you want to start a software business, Well, again, I would urge you to think about what is the MVP of your product, right? Like, how can you get to the most simple version of your desired product that still delivers the minimum value in order for it to be useful, And then the second you get to that point, so for you, if that's dropshipping and you're thinking about maybe, I don't know, dropshipping slippers, let's say, right? How can you get to a place where your business is just running enough to the point where you can start operating it and then start pushing your slippers, man. Just start showing them to people. Go knocking on doors. Tell them why your slippers are the best. At the end of the day, I think in the early days, you just need to get a bit of confidence. Really, that's what it comes down to. And if some people come up to you and they're like, Brandon, your slippers are the freaking best. There are no other slippers I ever want to wear for the rest of my life. You're going to be like, maybe I'm onto something. I'm going to get 100 pairs of slippers. And it's just that initial boost of confidence that I think is going to give you that push that you need. So get to your MVP, lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, start talking to people that might be your customers and start to build a backlog of customers that are willing to pay for your product early on. And number 3, try to do it as cheaply as possible without spending excessive amounts of money so you don't end up in a difficult financial situation out of the gate. And the good news is that in today's day and age, we have Shopify, we have dropshipping website, we have Oberlo, we have AI that can write copy for your website. You can pretty much start a business in a matter of a week, maybe even less if you put your mind to it. And everything, guys, can be done once you receive an order. Let's say you start a t-shirt business tomorrow. You can put up designs and not print anything until the order has been placed and paid for. You know what I mean? So just always try to think about how do you hedge against that financial risk. And I think you'll be able to find a lot of solutions there.
I think something you're seeing there as well is, I've read one of the books you recommended to me, Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And he says that motivation, a lot of people just wait on it, right? And maybe that's linked to inaction. And he argues that it's through action that we actually get motivated. How do you see that being true, and does it come across in your company as well?
The longer you wait, the harder it is to get going. The second you take the first little step, it's much easier to take the next one. It's a bit like working out, When you haven't worked out for 6 months, it's probably quite hard to get yourself to go to the gym. But once you're in that habit of, okay, you know what, at least I'm going for a walk every single day, going for a short run doesn't feel like a massive stretch anymore. So it's just that it's habit building at the end of the day. And I think to your point, a lot of people feel like they're sort of waiting for this perfect opportunity. They're dreaming up this dream business plan, and they need to get investors to get off the bench. That's not what it takes. You can have one customer and have a business. And then once you have one customer and have a business, it's much easier for you to get the next customer and have a 2-customer business. So I would really urge you to go back and really think, what is the least amount of work I can do to get to a place where I have someone who's willing to pay me for something? You just need to sell one pair of slippers to be a business. And then it's much easier for you to sell the next one. And I always see people who are talking about, starting a consulting business or coaching business or, some sort of a content creator business. And it's the same thing, they're spending months thinking about what camera to get or months thinking about what kind of content they're going to make, as opposed to just starting to make a video with your phone, recording a podcast on your laptop, right? Like the actual capital investment required to do episode 1 is relatively little. And before you guys know it, once you hit episode 10, you're going to know so much more about how to grow this podcast than you did before you ever filmed it the first episode. So I really applaud you guys on just getting the ball rolling here. I think that's going to pay you big dividends.
It's one of my friends said analysis paralysis, right? However, something, me and Brandon, we were sitting in lecture and they were talking about entrepreneurship, and one stat that absolutely shook me, that came out by the minutes, is that 72% of entrepreneurs experience mental health issues. And I remember it was right after COVID, it was maybe a month in, and I just remember out of nowhere, I just felt this down, and no matter what I did, it's like I couldn't get myself out of it or be happy. And the only way I went through it is when I started talking about it with my mom like a week after and some friends, and I kind of went out of it and never experienced something like this again. But it made me realize, wow, people really live this for almost years at a time or months at a time.
Yeah.
So as an entrepreneur, I'm sure you've had some really tough moments. How do you get through those?
Well, I think it's important to define things clearly out of the gate as well. And I heard something from Simon Sinek recently. He kind of challenged the notion of mental health and called it mental fitness instead. And that really resonated with me because in regular physical fitness, just because you haven't gone for a run in the last 3 days doesn't mean you're unfit, right? Maybe things are getting busy, maybe you're having a crazy week, and it's as simple as that. But mental health implies that it's sort of binary. You either have it or you don't. You can't have an off day. You're 100% or you're zero. And to your point, Adam, what you described about having a few rough weeks or months was maybe just a bit of a lull, right? That you then ended up coming out of, and now you're in a good place. But I think the reality is that our mental fitness is much more like this. It goes up and down constantly. And I think the more we take care of ourselves, the more we talk to professionals, the more we, create time and space to just give ourselves a bit of a break from the pressures of every day, the more likely we are to, of course, I'm removing some clinically, let's say, diagnosed cases here, because of course some people are in a much more difficult position than others. But for the most part, I think if you just make a habit out of taking care of yourself, you'll be much more better equipped to handle these ups and downs. So, of course, over the last 4 years, there have been tough times. Somebody once said that being an entrepreneur is like chewing on glass. And if that doesn't paint a vivid picture of the experience, then I don't know what will. It's really a painful journey. I'll give you an example. Just this month, I ended up stepping back as CEO to really take over the marketing department for the third time, I think, because we've now hired a marketing executive 3 times and we've retained them 0 times. Every single person that has come has left. And 3 years down the road, we're still in the exact same position from a marketing strategy, marketing foundation, marketing team perspective that we were in 3 years ago, which is just so demoralizing. Like it kind of feels like, how many times do I have to solve this problem for it to work? So it really makes you doubt yourself. It makes you doubt the path that we're on, makes you doubt some of the decisions you've made. And it's difficult, but the reality is you just have to be prepared to deal with situations like this time and time again, and believe that at the end of all of this, there is a better and a brighter future.
So a little back to the electric scooters. I remember the first time I saw them, it was probably close to 10 years ago. And it was just this one guy who would ride it to school. And at first I thought, oh, it's like bulky. I was riding my bike, other people were riding their normal scooters. And it was this thing that was probably like ahead of its time during that time period. And it wasn't until I watched Casey Neistat's vlogs and he had this electric skateboard where I thought, oh, like really cool. And this would be like so much better than like what I'm doing. And I know with your scooters, you're kind of targeting like the higher end of the market. What would you say makes your scooter unique, and what is the key to success?
It's a loaded question. You correctly identified that we make higher end scooters, but I think it's important to understand that we don't make higher end scooters for the sake of being wanting to be a premium brand. It's not like we decided we want to be the Gucci of scooters, so we're going to make really expensive scooters. We make expensive scooters because quality costs. as simple as that, And the fundamental thesis of our business is that we believe over the next decade, people will learn that different vehicles make sense for different use cases. What I mean by this is if you're going to the grocery store with your 3 kids and you want to haul your groceries back, your car is probably a great vehicle to get you there and back. You know what I mean? But if you're going to a dinner with friends and it's just you, and you're going to have to find parking downtown and you're going to have to be stuck in traffic on the way there, is going by car really the best choice? Perhaps a bike or a scooter makes way more sense, right? So I think there's an element of sort of like realizing, okay, I'm going there. It's just me. I don't need to carry anything. Okay, maybe I can take a scooter or a moped or a bike. Oh, but I'm carrying cargo. I'm carrying people. I'm transporting things. A car makes more sense, And of course, there are a couple of, filters we need to apply here, like climate and regulations and infrastructure, right? Like those are things that generally either accelerate the popularity of scooters or decelerate it. But for the most part, what we're really betting on is that in 10 years from now, you guys are going to have a small car, you're going to have a bicycle, you're probably going to have a moped or a scooter, and you're going to be able to say, okay, depending on what it is I'm doing today, I'm going to take this vehicle because it makes the most sense. And by the way, fun fact, those 3 vehicles combined are still going to be cheaper than one electric car on average. Yeah, so that's the crazy thing, internal combustion engine cars generate 80% of the energy to propel the vehicle itself. It's such a waste. It's such a loss, And yes, electric cars are kind of a solution, but the reality is they're just wasting a different kind of energy to propel themselves, And yes, it's much more sustainable, but ultimately the efficiency loss is still there. So that's sort of what we're trying to say. With a scooter, you're actually much heavier than the scooter itself. So most of the energy produced by the scooter is used to propel you, not the scooter. And that's why it makes sense. So long story short, that's kind of the fundamental thesis. And today, 75% of our customers come to us because they want to get rid of their cars, which is an amazing stat, So the North Star for the business, the thing that we're really, really focusing on today is how do we get 1 billion kilometers put on the Apollo vehicles by 2030? That's our master objective, and all departments are aligned accordingly. So from how we design our scooters to what kind of products we design to how we service them to how we support our customers, everything is done with the intention of just keeping our riders going for as long as possible and getting to that 1 billion kilometers on our scooters. And it's just scooters for now, but there may be different vehicles in the future. So we'll see how that pans out. What's important and critical to success, like you correctly asked before, is really just this idea of there's an expression which is having strong opinions loosely held, and I think that is something that's really core to our culture. It's we all feel pretty strongly about what we should be doing, but the second we have reason to doubt that what we're doing is the right move, we pivot, and that's kind of the sweet combination, because typically in order to have strong opinions, you need to have some sort of a rationale behind it, right? Like maybe some data, maybe anecdotal evidence, maybe just feel directionally that it's the right thing to do. But the second you start to see contrary evidence that suggests what you made is a mistake, you pivot, you switch, you moved in a different direction. And there's no ego, there's no pride, there's nobody walking around saying, well, you should have talked to me, that was my idea. No. Everyone here is really focused on the well-being of the business and making the best business decision possible, not protecting their individual self or their ego. So all to say, make a lot of decisions fast. Don't try to build the perfect anything like you guys are building with this podcast. Have shitty sound, have shitty like video quality. Who cares? In 10 episodes from now, you're gonna know so much more about how to do audio engineering and video engineering and everything in between, and you're gonna know so much better how to get new guests, and word's gonna spread. You're gonna learn so much by doing, as opposed to trying to craft the perfect format for the next 10 years. So. Again, strong opinions loosely held, prioritizing action, having a bias for action, and then pivoting really, really fast.
I think you can even apply that to life almost, right? Not ever assuming that you're right, but still having strong convictions in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, in our case, the difficulty is that we're dealing with pretty high performance products, and the question of safety, for example, is not something that we can just improvise on. Let's say there are things that you need to be able to assess and say, okay, this is a decision we can make pretty quickly and just see what happens and learn from it. And there are other things where we need to have really, really, really high standards for safety and design and engineering and testing and whatever, right? So, but the way to get there perhaps is still one where you can make quick decisions and learn from. So For example, how we do that in our company, we prototype really, really fast and a lot, we 3D print stuff all the time. We do FEA analysis all the time. We get samples made out of CNC machinery as opposed to waiting for final production, which just essentially means you spend a little bit more, but you get your production sample faster, and we ship it over here and we test it, So we're constantly iterating. The Apollo Pro we're launching, I don't know if you guys have seen that one. It's kind of a beast scooter. It's gone through 6 prototypes before we released it to the beta public, which is insane. That's just so many iterations, and it's so expensive. But we were able to do it in a pretty short amount of time and learn so much along the way. So, long story short, what makes you successful at Apollo at least is a bias for action, moving fast, and strong opinions loosely held that allow you to pivot even faster.
When looking at our analytics, most of our audience is 18 to 22. And this morning I was listening to a podcast, and they were saying how sometimes the best advice you can get is what not to do. So if you could go back and you'd have your 18-year-old self in front of you, what's something you would tell him not to do and something you would tell him to do?
I would say stop trying to please others and do what makes you happy. I think as an 18-year-old or 22-year-old or, somewhere in between, you tend to be bombarded with expectations from your parents, expectations from your peers, expectations from the program that you're in, that you're going to get certain grades, that you're going to get certain jobs. And that's all nice and fun and great until you realize that you're making decisions that make others happy and not necessarily make you happy. And I know, at least in my case, a lot of us, despite being pretty strong-willed and strong-minded, felt that the pressure was so intense that we just had no choice but to follow. So ultimately, did I need to go and work for a corporation for some amount of time before having this realization? Probably not. I could have just jumped right into entrepreneurship out of the gate. And I just wished I had listened to myself a bit more. So I would say to anybody listening, I know your parents probably have certain expectations of you. I know there probably feels like there's a career forming in front of you. And while that's great for many of you, and I sincerely wish you that it is the right career for you, some portion of you will feel like you're kind of doing it for the wrong reasons. And if you feel that misalignment of your values with perhaps what the reality is, you should spend some time digging into it and see if there's anything behind it, and try to unpack that, because there's a very good chance you're just you're fulfilling somebody else's expectations of your life.
Right. And as a tradition for this podcast that we're starting, we're asking our guests for their thoughts on a quote. So this quote came from our previous guest, which was Ann Stone, our professor. And so quote for you is, get over being right. Remember that life is a movie. This is just a snapshot. And this freeze frame is only right for a millisecond it was captured.
I love it. I think it makes me think about a quote that I used to resonate with quite a lot, which was, life is a marathon and your career is a marathon, not a sprint. It's sort of the same notion here, which is today might feel really, really sad, or it might feel really, really good. But the reality is you've got a lot of days ahead of you, knock on wood, and today's just going to be a distant memory very, very soon. And I think, Adam, we were talking about the notion of highs, right? From the subtle art of not giving a fuck. And I think it's something similar, right? Where the highs feel so good and it's what we kind of crave. But the reality is most of life happens in between the highs. So my thoughts are complete and utter agreement with that quote, I guess. And I wanted to maybe add to it, which is, in particular, within the context of entrepreneurship, there is a lot of value in doing this experience with somebody else. I love seeing you guys doing it together, not just because, it's more fun, but in my experience, the best moments in the history of Apollo felt twice as good when you have somebody else to celebrate them with. And the shittiest moments in the history of Apollo felt half as bad because you have somebody else to share that with. And so it only works in good ways in this case, So I really believe in what Anne said, and I also believe in sharing that experience with one other person, because the ups and the downs will both feel better as a result of it.